Okay, good afternoon everybody. Today we will get into the last part of the class, formal logic, um, chapter 5, which deals with categorical syllogisms. We will only do 5.1 and 5.2, which is like less than half of it really, but I don't want to get too complicated for you guys. And then next week we'll start chapter 6, and that will be the last chapter we will cover. Chapter 5, actually, like I said before, very solidly built on chapter 4. So you will need to remember today stuff you prepared for the exam and stuff you did on homework prior to this class, which is why it was so important. Yeah, like I think that last semester when we had this shutdown unexpectedly, I actually has removed chapter 5 altogether from the exam because I could not lecture on it, and I thought it was unfair to just demand that the student understand it on their own. But now we luckily have kind of a almost class-like environment, so I hope you guys will attend the lecture and watch the video if you don't understand something, and I'll do my best trying to explain it. And that way we can have it on the exam and on homework. Okay, so today 5.1. 5.1 is rather short and simple. We will mainly do exercises because the concepts there are, well, there's not that much. We will talk about categorical syllogisms, in particular standard form of categorical syllogism, mood and figure. You remember what we did at the beginning of class, hopefully. We talked about categorical syllogisms, and we were kind of identifying them by all three propositions, starting with all, some, no. Yes. Now that's a little more complicated than that, as you will see today. This is an example of categorical syllogism, just like we did before. Let me actually put it on the board, because we will kind of need to work with it a little bit. So all soldiers are patriots, and no traitors are patriots. And the conclusion, therefore, no traitors are soldiers. So this is what we did in chapter 1. We were just calling it categorical syllogism, and we were kind of leaving it at that. And remember, we actually talked about the fact that they are deductive arguments, and as such they can be valid or invalid, and then further sound or unsound. Now, sound and unsound, we're not going to work with that very much in this chapter, but the whole point of chapter 5 is to figure out whether they're valid or invalid. Because after we went quickly through all this deductive stuff at the beginning of class, chapter 1 mainly, we suddenly went chapter 2 dealing with language, chapter 3 dealing with all these inductive arguments and whether or not we have fallacies in them, and we were not talking about deductive at all. Chapter 4 was kind of, like I said, preparatory for chapter 5. So we did stuff there, but you may have trouble understanding how does it relate to the beginning of class. Because in itself, it doesn't seem to relate very closely. So now you'll finally understand it, because note what we were doing, working this immediate inference, we had just one premise and the conclusion, and we were drawing inference from that premise to the conclusion. And that's why. So now what we're going back to the categorical syllogism, you have two premises and the conclusion. And remember, syllogism, we say, is an argument which has two premises and the conclusion. And categorical one, we will give a better definition to it very shortly. But we were saying before that categorical is the one which starts with all, no, or some. Like I said, it's a little more complicated than that. So first thing about standard form. Well, there are several conditions it must meet in order for it to be in standard form. And the first thing you should know is that the terms have names. You do have 3 terms here, right? Can you see that? Traders, soldiers, and patriots. Those are the 3 terms. Each one of them has a particular name, and the easiest way to identify it is to look at the conclusion first, because your subject term of the conclusion and your predicate term of the conclusion will now be known as minor and major term. And the term which is not in the conclusion, there's 3 of them, right? So there's 1 more left. In this case, patriots will be known as a middle term. So this is the names of the 3 terms we have. Minor, major, and middle. There is actually a nice picture here. So let's take a look at the picture here. See, I did it in different color. So soldiers again would be your, do it this. I'll be drawing now on that. So soldiers, right? That would be your major term, and it is in your major premise. So the premise which has this term is called major premise. Now, traders is your minor term, and it is in your minor premise. And your major premise should always come first, and your minor premise second. How do you know what's your major premise? Whatever has your major term. How do you know what is your minor premise? Well, the other one, the one which has your minor term. And again, whatever is not in your premise, in this case patriots, that's your middle term. So this is the 3 names of the terms you should know. Now, standard form categorical syllogism has the following requirements. All 3 statements must be standard form categorical propositions. That's why it was on the exam. And you should know now. What is a standard form categorical proposition? Do you remember? There was a question on the exam. There was a question on the practice exam. So remember the requirements for it to be in standard form. It should have quantifier, it should have copula, and it should have 2 clearly distinguished terms, subject term and predicate term, which again should follow all the rules. That's why there was a question on the exam from this list, which one is a standard form. So all 3 of them should follow that in order for a categorical syllogism to be in standard form. All 3 of them must be standard form categorical propositions. Now, 2 occurrences of each term must be identical. So naturally, again, if we look at this example, if instead of patriots on one place, you would have something like, I don't know, students. All soldiers are students, no traders are patriots, and so on. That would obviously make it not standard form, because you would then have 4th term or some sort of difference between them. They should also be used in the same sense. Well, it makes sense, right? If you're using, for example, the term bank, you cannot in one proposition mean it as a financial institution, but in another proposition talk about bank of a river, right? That would be a violation. It's the same word, but it's different sense. So again, you can have these situations. But most importantly, number 4. Number 4 tells you that major premise must always be listed first, and minor premise must always be listed second. So what's your major premise? Again, whatever is your in a second position in your conclusion, your major term. That term, the premise which has that term, should always be first. Okay, let's do a little, well, no, this is the picture from the book before we do exercise. So this is kind of helps you to understand, right? That doesn't have any terms here. Anything can go here. But it always should follow this pattern. So suppose that you have x and y, whatever they may be. So where should your y be? It's either here or here, because it always has to be in the first premise. Whatever your x is should be either here or here. Doesn't matter right or left, but it has to be second. That is the two requirements which you have to always remember. All three of them have to be standard form, and the major premise should be in your first premise. That is very important. The fact that obviously they should mean the same thing and so on, that is also important, but we're not going to encounter too many exceptions from that, not on exam, not on homework. But this is something you should really remember. Okay, let's do the example. Now let's take a look at this. Is it in standard form? Let's do it as a poll. Let's take advantage of the poll option. Yes or no? Is it standard form? Look at it, think about it. And vote. Vote. Mini elections. Easier to count for us, isn't it? We don't have to spend days going over those bulletins as they do. Okay, 2 more people. Do you want to vote, or are you guys browsing Facebook there, not paying attention? Okay, so let's tally it up. The results of our election is this. Yes wins with 6 votes, and only 1 vote is no. Okay, so why is it not in standard form? Which, by the way, is the correct answer. Looks like Sandy is the only one who noticed that. While she's typing, I'll explain to you, because I guess it's not for extra credit. Again, remember, your major term, premise which has your major term, should be what? It should be first. Is it first? No, it's somehow second. It should not be second. You should switch them around. This one should go here, this one should go there. Remember, the order of the premises doesn't matter for the purposes of determining validity, but it does matter for standard form. And in a few minutes you will see why. Yes, so some watercolors are masterpieces should be on top. It should start with some blah blah blah, and then watercolors are paintings, and then the conclusion, because this is your major term, and whatever is your major term should be on top, in the top premise. So those of you guys who said yes are wrong. It is not in standard form. This is how it would be in standard form. So we switch them around. Now your major premise is on top, in the top position, and your minor premise is second position. Okay, let's do an exercise for extra credit now. Identify your major, minor, and middle terms in this categorical syllogism. First person to do it gets first extra credit. Remember, you guys all at 0. Nobody has any extra credit. You'll need it. It will apply for the final. So go ahead, do your job. Make sure to give me complete answer. Remember the terms. How do we distinguish the terms? How do we figure out what the terms are? That is important. This is why we were doing it in chapter 4. So now it should be easy. Okay, so why is that the case? Well, again, first thing you always do, look at the conclusion. This would be your major term. This would be your minor term. Easy breezy. What is left? Well, what is left is insects that eat mosquitoes. And that would be your middle term. And remember that we always look at the quantifier and copula, and the terms will be whatever is between them. So to say insects would be incorrect. We have insects in both terms here, so insects cannot be a term. The term is insects that eat mosquitoes, another term is insects that should be killed, and the third term is dragonflies. So good job, Elizabeth. Make sure you actually understand that. This is the everything in different colors. Okay. Now, standard form categorical syllogism. Now we can formally define finally what is a categorical syllogism, and know that it is a little bit different from what we were saying at the beginning. So categorical syllogism is deductive argument consisting of three categorical propositions that is capable of being translated in standard form. So this is a standard form, but it doesn't have to be. And so when we were saying at the beginning that it should start with all, no, and some, no, it doesn't have to. Sometimes it doesn't start with that. In fact, the way Aristotle was working with them, he never started it with all, no, or some. He actually started it with the word which can be translated as every instead of all. But this is how we formalized it later on. So you can say it in a variety of ways. In language, people do not speak like this, right? You can still use categorical syllogism in language and say instead of, well, if we look at the board, what can you say here? Every soldier is a patriot, you can say, right? And no traitors are patriots, so no traitors are soldiers. So even though you're saying every soldier is a patriot and you're not using the word all, the meaning is exactly the same. So that is still categorical syllogism, it's just not standard form. So there are different ways to say it, but in order for us to work with it, we have to put it in standard form, because that's how we can evaluate them and make sure they are valid. Why do we care again? What is a valid syllogism or any valid argument? What do we say what do we mean when we say it's valid? You remember from the beginning of class? It means that if the premises are true, the conclusion will always be true. Yeah, I guess that's another way to put it. Necessarily true based on premises. The way you phrase it may be a little more confusing, but it does mean kind of the same thing. So yes, if the premises are true, the conclusion will always be true. Now, what if the premises are not true? Then we have no idea what conclusion is going to be. It may even be true, but by coincidence rather than by necessity. And we are looking for necessity. We're looking to make sure that whatever we put in there, the conclusion will always come up true. Okay, so this is what categorical syllogism is. We will be working with standard form categorical syllogism in this chapter. Now, mood and figure. This is the two important things which we'll learn today. What are they? First, let's start with the mood. Once you put categorical syllogism in standard form, the mood of it will simply be the letter names for each proposition. So what are the letter names here? This is again why we did that in chapter 4, and you should know it by now. This is A, this is E, this is E. There you go. That is your mood. As simple as that. A, E, E. Note now why it is important that they are in correct order. Because if they were the other way around, if we had no traitors are patriots, all soldiers are patriots, no traitors are soldiers, we would get E-A-A. E-A-E, rather than A-E-E. We would get this. And that is incorrect. This is correct. So you have to make sure they are correctly ordered before you get the mood. And once you get them correctly ordered, getting a mood is a super easy operation, because all you need to do is remember the letter names. And that's it. Okay, so another example which they give here is if your major premise is A, minor is O, and conclusion is E, then your mood would be A, O, E, and so on and so forth. So how do you determine the mood? Put it in standard form. Make sure it is in standard form, and then read the 3-letter names top to bottom, and that will give you the mood. How about the figure? Okay, in order to understand the figure, you have to understand the following. It also is relatively easy, but note that if we remove whatever we already have in here and just leave the quantifiers and copulas, there's actually 4 different ways we can have middle term in this case. Now middle term could be either here or here, and it could be either here or here, right? Why? Because whatever is your P, whatever is your major term will always be either here or here on top. Whatever is your subject term would always be either here or here. But it doesn't matter right or left. And so based on that, you can have 4 possible situations. Situation number 1, you can have your middle term like this, and that would be your predicate and subject term. So here and here. Situation number 2, you can have your predicate and subject term to the left, but your middle term to the right of them. Situation number 3, you can have your middle terms to the left and your predicate and subject terms here. And finally, the last one is you can have your middle terms like that and your predicate and subject terms here. This is all the possible combinations. You cannot have any more combinations than that, and for this reason there is a simple and easy way to remember the figures. This is figure 1, this is figure 2, this is figure 3, and this is figure 4. What you need to do is to strike the line through your middle terms. So suppose this is your middle terms. You strike the line through them and it looks like this. Therefore it will be figure 3. How do you remember this 4? Well, there's actually also kind of an easy way to do it. What you need to do is remember this figure, and it will help you. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's look at the book. Maybe it will be easier for you to figure it out when you look at the book if you are confused. So this is the 4 possible combinations, right? Middle terms can be like this, can be like this, can be like this, can be like this. The other positions will be taken by your subject and predicate term of the conclusion. Now, this is the figure to remember. This. And that figure tells you if you strike the line through your middle terms, that line will either go like this, in which case it is 4, right? Or it might go like this, in which case it would be 1. Or it might be to the right, in which case it will be 2. And this is your predicate and subject term. Or it might go like this, in which case it will be 3. And this is all the combinations you can have. So this is kind of the little picture you should remember. Okay, why do we need the mood and the figure? Well, because we can determine validity by simply looking it up in nice and easy tables. If you know your mood and figure, you can just look it up. There's actually 2 tables. Table number 1 is for the ones which are unconditionally valid from Boolean standpoint. Remember that if they are valid from Boolean, they are automatically valid from Aristotelian. So this is why we call them unconditionally valid forms, and this is all of these forms. So for example, suppose you got A, 1. You look at figure 1, and there it is. What if it was A3? Well, then you would have to look at figure 3, and it's not here, so it's not valid unconditionally. If it's not in this table, you have another table which gives you conditionally valid forms from Aristotelian standpoint. It's kind of in addition to the previous one. It is in case if the first one failed. Now you look here. Again, you can do it figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure 4. There's one more thing though. Remember, and this is important. If you found it in this table, you also have to make sure what? That your what we now call critical term exists. Because in Aristotelian standpoint, remember, there is a difference. It's not unconditionally valid, it's valid, but only if the critical term, whatever term you need, does actually exist. What is your critical term? This is where it says, in this part of the table. So, for example, if you have EAO1, you have gotten EAO1. So you determined, based on the rules, it is in standard form, you determined that it is EAO1. You checked the previous table and it's not here. You check this table and it is here. Now you look at the condition, and the condition is your subject term must exist. What is your subject term? Well, look at your conclusion. You will have subject and predicate terms like this, right? Therefore, S, all S are P, for example. So that term must exist. It could be middle term, it could be predicate term. The table will tell you. But that is an additional operation you must always perform. If you cannot find it on either chart, then it is invalid. Yes. Okay, so we have total of 15 forms which are valid from Boolean, an additional 9 which valid from Aristotelian. Remember, if it's valid from Boolean, it automatically is valid from Aristotelian. But there is 9 additional ones which are conditionally valid. So this is basically what this tells you, this little table. 15 unconditionally valid, another 9 conditionally valid, total 24. 24 valid forms. Now, a little bit of a historical curiosity. We use tables today, and we all have tables. Back in medieval days, they did not have tables. So they were still doing that. In medieval universities, this is one of the first classes they were taking in medieval universities in like 13th, 14th century. How did they learn these valid forms? They actually learned them with this little poem. It is Latin, mainly Latin names, and they were chanting it endlessly with their professor, I guess, leading the chant. He would go, Barbara salarendare ferioc prioris, and so on. And they would chant it and chant it and chant it. Why the hell did they do that? Note that if you look at the vowels, this one is A, Barbara. Celarent is E, dare is I, ferioc is E-I-O, prioris means one. So if you go back, this is A, E, A-I, E-I-O, figure 1. And we still, by the way, call this one Barbara. That is why we call it Barbara, from that poem. This is the second position, this is the third position, and so on. And they were chanting it. Why? Because if you remember that, suppose you don't have the table handy, and remember, books at the time were extremely expensive. They couldn't print books. They were hand writing them, and the paper was expensive. Everything was very expensive. Few people had it. But if it's in your memory, you can just go, it is valid. right? Because if you remember that, for example, A, O, O, barocco, secundae, that means if it is figure 2, A, O, O, it is a valid syllogism. So this is how they did that back then. I am not gonna make you remember that. It's not gonna be on the exam. You don't have to chant it or anything like that. But it's just kind of a historical curiosity. And like I said, it goes back all the way to Aristotle. Even though Aristotle wasn't using any tables, he was presenting it in a different way. Nonetheless, it was discovered by Aristotle, and in medieval times they really were fascinated by logic. They did not know exactly how to use it at the time. They were trying to use it to prove the existence of God and so on. But nonetheless, they realized that there is something very powerful about it, which we still know and believe nowadays. And nowadays it is some of the basically reasons, something which gave us the computers based on formal logic. All the computer programs are formal logic based. You will see it a little bit better in chapter 6, but this is a foundation of it. Yeah, I actually had in one of the classes, students suggested that they do it for extra credit. It was in a classroom. They were like, we will learn the entire poem and we will chant it for extra credit. And I said, well, that's a weird extra credit, but let's see how it works. So they then decided that it's too difficult. They did not do it after all. It's hard to remember, especially nowadays, because, you know, these names, back then they were kind of very common names. Today, try to remember all that. Tetria, Dharapati, I mean, come on. If you can remember all that from memory, that's worthy of extra credit. But, well, unfortunately, it'll be difficult to chant it now, too, because we don't meet in person. But nonetheless. Okay, so let's do some exercises here. That's pretty much all the material. Try this one. So it is already in standard form. For extra credit, give me major, minor, and middle terms, but also now give me mood and figure for this particular syllogism. So once you get that correctly, you get the extra credit. Well, remember, you do need to take notes during the class. I told you guys many times. Otherwise, how are you going to do any extra credit? You are committing it all to memory? Well, if you have an excellent memory, maybe, but I would certainly take notes. It is in the book too, and now you can obviously use the book if you can juggle it, or if you have the physical book, I don't know. Whichever way you prefer. Notes would probably be easier because you can immediately have it on one page of paper. In the book you probably need to look it up, but whichever way it works for you, I don't care. As long as somebody gets it right, you get extra credit. The point is to learn that stuff, and whichever way it works for you. Okay. Well, looks like Martin got it right. Yeah. So again, that is a very easy operation. How do you determine your major and minor term? Look at your conclusion. This is your conclusion. This would be a minor term. This would be a major term. Right? Then look what is left. What is not in the conclusion. And in this case, that would be inherited afflictions. Right? So that's how you determine that. How do you determine your mood and figure? Well, this is E, obviously, right? This is O, and this is I. So it is E, O, I. How do you determine finally what is the figure? Well, strike the line through your middle terms, inherited affliction, and you will have two X's, or predicate and subject term, to the left of the line. Remember, this is the picture, which is why I said you have to remember the picture. 1, 2, 3, and 4. If it is 1, you would have the subject and predicate like this, and your middle terms will go like this. So the line would be like this. If it is 4, also easy, you have it the other way, like this. But sometimes students confuse between 2 and 3, so just remember, in 2 you will have your subject and predicate to the left, as it is the case now, of the line, and in 3 to the right of the line. So this is, if you remember that picture, that helps you to immediately figure it out, and then you know it is 2. Okay, so good job. Let me make the record of it. Okay, this is the correct answer. Yeah, so when you also have it in a nicer way there like this. Let's do one more. Again, same thing. So maybe somebody else can do it now, or I don't know, maybe Martin again. Well, it's just incomplete. You have to obviously add more to that if you want extra credit. I understand sometimes we can accidentally hit enter. No big deal. Just make sure you have all the parts before I give you extra credit. Unless somebody else can actually steal that. Okay, yeah, again, this time it should be easier, right? This is your quantifier, this is your minor term, this is your major term, and whatever is left would be a middle term. And again, how do you figure out the figure? Strike the line, you have the 2 terms to the right of the line. So again, based on this picture, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can hopefully see that that fits 3, right? They are to the left of the other 2 terms. Yeah. So I, 3. If you do a few exercises, that should not be too difficult. Okay, now part 2. In part 2 we will take the same 2 syllogisms and we will figure out whether they are valid or not. So that's the first one we did, right? We established that it is EOI2. Now the easy part, figure out whether it is valid from Boolean, valid from Aristotelian, or invalid. Give me the answer. Okay, well, note that Martin is right. Sandy, if it is valid from Boolean, that would always be valid from Aristotelian. It's impossible for it to be valid from Boolean and not valid from Aristotelian. Also, in order for it to be valid from Boolean, what do? How do you figure it out? Well, let me record Martin's extra credit before I do that so that I wouldn't forget. Okay, it's EOI2. So first you go to this table, look at figure 2. Do you see EOI here? No, it can look similar like EIO, but that's why the order matters. AIO is not the same as EOI. So that is not here. Then you can also look here and it is again not here. So in that case that would be just invalid. Okay, invalid. Now let's do it for 5. How about 5? Okay, so remember, what you do is you first look at this table. If it's in this table, then it is valid unconditionally. Now, is it in this table? Do you see it in 3 in this column? No, it's not in this column. So it cannot be valid unconditionally. Then you can progress to this table and oh, there you go, it actually is here, isn't it? So it actually is valid from Aristotelian. But also do not forget, and in this case that really doesn't matter, but it can always matter. You have to check the condition. The condition here is that middle term must exist. What is your middle term? What do you mean? Can't check like what? Ozone molecules, that's your middle term. You should just ask yourself, does it exist? You can check it because suppose it was unicorns. All unicorns are good absorbers of ultraviolet. All unicorns are things that destroyed by chlorine. Now, even though it is in this table, it would still be existential fallacy because unicorns do not exist. So then the answer would be invalid existential fallacy. Okay, well, that's fine, but keep that in mind. I'm not taking points. You can try, and if you fail, no big deal. Okay, so who got it right? Karen was the first one. Yes, Karen, good job. Yes, so once again, do not forget that, because in the future it may not be necessarily something which exists. 2 steps. If it's in the first table, you don't need to do that. If it's in the second, it is conditionally valid. And what's the condition? It's described here. One of the 3 classes, depending on what your mood and figure is, one of the 3 classes must exist. Only one. You don't care about the other 2. The other 2 are not critical. This is what we call critical term. So in this case, critical term would be middle term. What is your middle term? You can easily find out, because when you go back to it, what is your middle term? Well, the term which is not in the conclusion. We just did the exercise. We figured it out. So whatever your middle term turns out to be must actually exist. And yes, ozone molecules exist, so no problem here. But if it was unicorns, or I don't know, witches, that would of course be a problem. And then it would be existential fallacy. Okay, but in this case we are good. It's valid from Aristotelian. Okay, now that part has exercises which are a little bit difficult, so let's do this one together. I want to explain it to you guys first myself, otherwise you will not be able to do it. So this is what they want you to do. It might be on homework too. They tell you to first put it in standard form, and only then get the mood and figure. So you are given some latchkey children are not kids who can stay out of trouble. For some youngsters prone to boredom are latchkey children, and no kids who can stay out of trouble are youngsters prone to boredom. They already give you letter names for your terms, L, K, and Y. Okay, let's do it together on the board. So first step, just get the form the way it is presented to you. Straightforwardly, get the form. It says some latchkey children, L, are not kids who can stay out of trouble. So just write down some L are not K, kids who can stay out of trouble. Then it says for some youngsters prone to boredom are latchkey children. So keep the word for. The word for is what? Remember, we did it in chapter 1. It is your indicator word. So it says for some youngsters prone to boredom, some Y are latchkey children, RL. And then it says and no kids who can stay out of trouble, K, are youngsters prone to boredom. No, K, R, Y. Now, we have to put it in standard form. 2 things important. One of them, what is our conclusion? What is our conclusion here? Take a look at it. What is the conclusion? We did that in the first exam, so you should know it by now. Look at your indicator words. Do you have indicator words? Yes, I put it here. What are these indicator words indicating? They are indicating premises. So this is premise 1. This is premise 2. So for this reason and for this reason, some LA are not K. This would be your conclusion. Conclusion should go last. So you should actually place it here. It should say therefore some L are not K. So we move the conclusion where it's supposed to go. Now are we done? Are we good? Is this standard form? Remember the requirements. Obviously we don't care that they're used in the same sense because we don't have anything right now, it's just letters. But what do we care about? Major and minor term. Where should the major term be? What is our major term? Remember, this is our major term and this is our minor term. Where should our major term be? It should be on top. Is it on top? No, it's not, because there it is, right here. K. It's not on top. So we have to move this on top. Now, it is in standard form. Now, we can get our mood and figure. And that's now very easy. So this is use different color. E, this is I, and this is O. So our mood and figure is E, I, O. And how do we know what our figure is? Well, this is our middle term. We strike the line, and so we get what? 4. So this is how the complete answer should look like. Okay. I actually am not sure about, I haven't checked what's there on the homework. It could be, but you will find out. Okay, so this is the answer. Note that I actually got this answer correctly. No K or Y, some Y or L. Some L are not K, E, I, O, 4. That is the answer. Great, I get extra credit. Okay, now you guys do this part, which is easy part. Figure out whether it's valid, invalid, valid from Aristotelian. I'll give you extra credit for that. Okay, yeah, it is valid because, again, we look at column number 4 and we do actually find it here. So it is unconditionally valid. Who did? Okay, lovely. Now you try to do the hard work and do the same thing here. This is what you're given. This is what I'm looking for. That stuff. Give me the correct answer here and you get another extra credit. I'll be right back. So, a few minutes for you to work on. Well, the answer should be like what we have on the board. I'm looking for the form and mood and figure. You have to give me the form too. Okay. Yes, Erica, good job. That is absolutely correct. This is it. Again, note that how do you do that in case if you guys are confused. Once you pull the form out, you will see that this is your major term. That major term should be on top, and it was not on top. It was no R, W, all W, R, M. So you have to switch them around. Once you switch them around, then you will get the correct mood and figure. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the correct mood and figure. So, good job, Erica. Okay, now let's do the easy part too and then figure out validity. Somebody hopefully can do it quickly and get extra credit. That's should be very easy. Oh, don't worry too much about it. Okay, well, look at it. Dainara is really rocking that part. Second extra credit for you. Yes, it's just invalid. And again, that's fairly easy because you don't find E, A, E, I either here or here. So that is a very quick job if you know what you're doing. Okay, now let's do another extra credit. In this case, the work on it is kind of reverse. You're given mood and figure. What I'm looking for is for you to reconstruct the form and then tell me what the form is, the syllogistic form. Now, what will you call your terms? Doesn't really matter, but the easiest way is to stick with subject, predicate, and middle. Just S, M, P. If you use something else but you have correct form, it's okay, but I would prefer S, M, and P. Okay, let's do this one together, and the next one, which is like that, hopefully somebody can do that. Unless, does anybody want to submit it? Because I'm not sure if somebody is actually close to producing something or not. It's taking a little long. It really shouldn't be very long. Yes, exactly. See, Erica, why are you worried? Look how you do it. So you have E, you know, it's E, I, A, right? So you should have something which starts with no, and then blah blah, R, blah blah. Then you will have some, blah blah, R, blah blah, and then you will have all, blah blah, R, blah blah. That blah blah will be S, that blah blah will be P. Your P should be on top and your S on the bottom. Since it is figure 4, remember that your M's should go like this. So that should be your M and that should be your M, right? Because that's figure 4. Line goes like that. So that should be a P and that should be a S. And this is what Erica got, and this is the correct answer. No P or M, some M or S, all S or P. See, that's how you get it. Okay, well, fine. Do this one then. One more, same thing. Okay. I'm guessing you are going with an X instead of an M. Like I said, I guess it doesn't matter that much. It does look correct. Sandy, good job. Yes. So instead of M, she has an X, but whatever. X it may be. Good job. So you got your extra credit. Okay, there will be obviously more extra credit when we continue. Plenty of opportunities for everybody. Just make sure you attend. Hopefully you guys got it, and hopefully you can see how much knowing all this stuff from chapter 4 actually helps, because this is all based on chapter 4, which is why I wanted you to do it and have an exam on it and have it well entrenched in your mind. We will go a little bit further in chapter 5 on Tuesday, and then we will quickly progress to chapter 6, because like I said, I don't want to do the entire chapter 5. That may be too much of complicated material. We already have enough. And chapter 6, we're not going to do the entire thing. We'll skip something there, but most of it. And then we will be done. Yes, of course, there is a homework on this, on 5.1, due this Sunday, as usual. Yes, 6.5 is skipped. Make sure you do the homework. Make sure you get this stuff right, because when we continue on Tuesday, hopefully you will already know all that well enough. I will put up this video on YouTube as usual. You can rewatch it. If you did not understand something first time, it will be there. And then yes, do the homework, which of course, like I said, yes, homework is an excellent tool which helps you to understand the material. I cannot explain it in as much detail, and I cannot grade it myself, but the way it's done on MindTap is excellent, which is why I really insist on students getting it for this class, because that's the best way to learn all this stuff on your own time too. You can do it anytime you like, but when you keep on doing it, you learning this and understanding it much better than just listening to the explanation. Okay, this is all we have for today. Any questions about anything?